Hello, everyone. Welcome to Literature Across Borders, a one of its kind transnational literary exchange program dedicated to books for young readers. My name is Megha, and I've had the enormous pleasure and privilege of setting up this project with the wonderful Dr. Alexia Casale at Bath Spa University in the UK back in 2023. In Literature Across Borders, we have students from India and UK look at books, thematically related books from each other's countries to understand how authors from different cultures are approaching similar themes. And in today's dialogue, which is the second dialogue of our third edition, we would be looking at graphic non-fiction from UK and India on ancient civilizations. The books in today's dialogue are The People of the Indus by Nikhil Gulati and Norse Myths by Matt Ralph and Katie Ponder. Chairing today's dialogue is Suzanne Faria. Suzanne is a Literature Across Borders alumnus from season 2, and we are delighted to have her back to chair a dialogue this season. She's a part-time student of the MA Writing for Young People program at Bath Spa University and is passionate about inclusive stories for children that can reflect many different life experiences. So, Suzanne, can't wait for you to start the dialogue and listen into what the students and what you all have thought of the two books that we have for today's dialogue. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Megha. Well, first I'd like to welcome everyone, and I want to introduce Ayan Sharif, who's an English and Creative Writing BA at Ashoka University. He is a fourth-year English and Creative Writing major, and his interests include children's literature and food writing. And also we have Laura Elizabeth Jackmond, who is a student of the MA Writing for Young People at Bath Spa University. She is an American living in France and already holds an MA in Creative Writing from the University of Hull, and is currently working towards another MA in Writing for Young People at Bath Spa. So thank you so much for joining this dialogue, and I know we've got lots of questions to get through together, and I'm sure it'll be really lovely and an illuminating discussion. So I'll fire in, and well, shall I start with you, Ayan, with the first question, and then I'll go to Laura, and then we can have an exchange, and then we'll swap around as we go. So the first question was, have you read any illustrated non-fiction from India or UK before? And how was your experience of reading a book from a different country?
So I have read a few books of nonfiction, which are graphic previously. Some of them are like graphic novels like Persepolis, but for children, the books that I read when I was growing up were books about like Indian dignitaries and world leaders. So you had books on like the Queen and the freedom fighters, which were illustrated to give children a sense of what that time period was like and to introduce them to that bit of history. So it was interesting that these books also focus on history, because that was the kind of literature that I read as a graphic novel while I was growing up as well.
Oh, that's great. Oh, thank you. Laura, how about you?
So I'm a little older, so I'm gonna say I read books about American culture to my children, which would be like myths, creation myths from different American Indian or Native American tribes, or poems about, things in American history that happened, like the Revolutionary War. There's a lot of poetry and things like that, but it's illustrative for kids. So I was reading stuff like that. And now that I'm at a university in the UK, I'm more interested in, learning about more what happens, what kind of myths were. I mean, I know about the Vikings, but we didn't study that at school, in the States. So now I'm really curious about that. Of course, I think everyone knows about the Greek myths, and I read a few books like that for my kids, illustrated Greek myths, which they love too. So that was my experience.
Oh, thank you both. Yeah, I was interested in that question because I always consider myself much more as a fiction and words reader. But when you mention myths and Greek myths and illustrated children's books and Persepolis, I've also read. Um, but I was very struck by the difference in attention that's needed when from just words to how much pictures can convey and the kind of time it took for me to kind of really take in a lot of those details. Oh, thank you. I'll go on to question 2, and I'll come to you first this time, Laura. And this is a question about the illustrations, as both covers have strong images.
Yeah.
And that's your first impression of what the book might be about. So I wondered, did the cover entice you in? And can you say something about your experience of the illustrations? Did they help your understanding of the subject matter of the book?
Yeah, okay. So for me, the cover was amazing. You know, I'm like, I've got to read this. I've got to read this. And I'll say why. So because it's sort of divided diagonally, and on the upper part, you have the blue of the Indus and the green of the fields. And then the lower part, you have sort of a city, you know, that's going up, and everything is sort of sand colored with dark outlines around it. And there are three little art pieces, so a little sculpture, a bust, a recipient, and a seal. And as an undergrad, I studied sculpture. Yes, and there it is. I should have held it up. Yeah, it's so beautiful, isn't it? It's just, yeah. And then you have the author here, and you're like, oh, he's going to tell us a story. So it's really it got me really excited. But when I saw these 3 things, they reminded me of when I studied ceramics as an undergrad, and I loved ancient ceramics. And I was like, oh, I've seen these somewhere before, but I don't know anything about the people of the Indus. I don't know. So I was a little confused. So I was really excited about getting into it. And then I went inside the book, and it's like a museum visit. You know, the author takes you in, and he's little, he's like little drawing, and he's presenting and going like this, and it's almost like you don't have to read the book by yourself, because he's there to present the material to guide you, really, to show you, look, take a look at this and take a look at that. And the drawings are amazing. So what I had written down was sometimes let me just find one. There's like one page which is, so I love this kind of thing, a pottery fragment, right? So it's just one whole page of one thing. And then sometimes at other times you've got this like completely dense, information. You're like, wow, it took me so long to read this, but it was so fascinating. So I feel like it was different all the way through to hold the interest of the reader, so that it wasn't too dense all at once, and it wasn't too spaced out that you would get bored either. I mean, I think they did it super well, the page, the spreads. Really, I don't even know how they did that. So that was amazing to me. So it really helped me read it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's fantastic. Yes, I love the man. He was like your companion.
Yeah.
Through.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So, Ayan, how did you find the illustrations for Norse myths, and what was your impression? And
I found it quite intriguing. I saw the book and it was immensely beautiful. We are holding up for a second.
Oh,
And it has
you.
this silver foil, which is very
Yeah.
enticing to me. And it has all of these symbols that I sort of recognize from encountering Norse myths here and there, maybe in pop culture or in some reimaginings. So you have the long ship, you have Thor's hammer. And so these are recognizable things, but also there's like a mask and a bird, which I don't recognize. So I immediately wanted to know more. And like the art style for the book is most clear for the fox here, because the whole book is textured like that, and it makes for such an engaging read. And I really especially enjoyed the way the gods and the characters are drawn, because most of them are in side profile, and you have this like regal sort of imagery, which really adds to the weight of what you're reading. And the book in contrast to the people in the Indus, is so colorful and so textured that you just want to keep reading. You want to see what each page will unfold. Like, you can turn to a random page and it's just full of color. And it also really helped me visualize the myths, especially because there's some creatures that are mentioned. There's a dragon, there's a serpent of the world. I'll try and find it in a second. But it really helped me visualize those in the way that they were drawn and with the texture and everything. So I quite enjoyed it. And I don't think if I'd read these myths without the illustrations that I would have had the same impact on me, because I wouldn't be able to see in my mind with just a description what these creatures are, what the gods and the Vikings were encountering. And so that really changes your experience.
Yes, I felt very similarly. In fact, the contents page kind of sets you up for what you're going to find with these monsters and the trickster Thor dressed in a wedding dress and some awful sacrifice going on. So you're kind of immediately aware, and it really does bring the stories into such vivid, the illustrations bring the stories into such vivid life. Okay, to go on to the next question, and I'll swap over and come back to you first. As a UK reader, and I mean, we of course did Viking myths in primary school. I remember, loving drawing the long ships and all the wars. But I certainly wasn't familiar at all or knew about the people of the Indus. So that's so enlightening. A particularly, oh sorry, I'm looking at my wrong piece of paper. So yes, what I wondered were what was surprising for you in the Norse myths, and could you share anything particularly interesting or illuminating that you learned from your reading of them?
Okay, yes. So I did know about the people of the Indus. We did this chapter in grade 6. And that book was still interesting because you had the author narrating it. So it felt a lot more engaging and interesting. But with the Norse myths, I've had some experience encountering them. You have the Marvel movies that have Thor, and you have the How to Train Your Dragon movies, and there's a lot of young adult adaptations. But I never read the myths just for themselves. So I never knew what the myths actually were, who the people were, who the gods were. So what this book does is gives you a very good primer of what the stories actually are. And you get a very clear sense of what was happening and what is taken to build all of these adaptations that you see later. And if you could just come back to me in a second about the section, because I'm going to try and find it and then.
Oh yes, I will.
Get back. Yeah.
Oh yeah, thanks for saying. Yes. So Laura, what was particularly surprising or illuminating for you from the Indus?
Yeah, so first of all, that I had never heard of them. Why? Because I've been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I've been to the Louvre, I've been to the Boston Museum of Art, and I think it's because they probably all have a section on the people of Indus because their art is really small, but it's also because we're sort of taught about Egypt and Mesopotamia, and they built really big things. There's even in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they took one of the, I don't know how they took this from Egypt, but they did. They took this little sort of shrine, and you can go into it. It's pretty big, and they rebuilt it in the Met, with the windows overlooking Central Park, and it's just pretty amazing. So those kinds of presentations are, I think they eclipse often the smaller art. And so I probably went, oh yeah, well, that's why they look familiar on the cover, because, oh, that must be Egyptian or that must be Mesopotamian, without really reading. So I did learn a lesson that I'm going to pay more attention in museums and really read where things are from. The other thing that I really liked, particularly interesting, I think, for a child, also is on page 38, is the explanation and examples of belief systems. And so it's talking about, like, these are just constructs, so it is in the section of why the people of the Indus did not build pyramids. And, all kids would go, oh, where are the pyramids? Or where are the ziggurats? Well, they didn't, but they didn't have to because they didn't have that kind of centralized power and they didn't need to. But it's not because they didn't have engineering skills. They built walls and they built, the mounds. And there's an example of walls and, the measurements. They made bricks and they were all exactly the same size and the same size as modern bricks, So they had a lot of skill. It's just that, they didn't have a king who needed a big pyramid just to bury him and his family in. So they were, for me, that was surprising that there was a society that was probably a little more like everybody profited from their economic, upbringing, how would you say that? When they were, everybody rose with what's that expression? You rise, all the boats rise with something. It's sort of everyone. Was not equal, but yeah, everybody was fine. So that really surprised me. I was like, oh wow, that's like such an interesting idea that existed back when I thought everybody had a king.
Yes, that's so interesting.
That.
That chapter of why didn't they build pyramids really struck me, and that really they have a need for that kind of generation. And yes, the prosperity went back into people. Yeah. And yes, I want to come back to you, Ian, as you were.
Yes. So the most interesting section to me was a little early on. It's called Odin Seeks the Runes. And so this is the illustration here. And it's Odin hanging upside down with a spear that he stabbed into his side. And he's looking at these runes. And he bleeds there for 9 nights. And then he's looking at the runes written on the trees. And then he gets the secrets to healing people. And so the way I'd heard about the Norse gods was that they were all powerful, knew everything, just big people. And then here you see the sacrifice he commits to get this knowledge. And what I especially admire about this book is that here you have Odin, who the story is about, but here there's also these 3 figures and you're very invested in who they are. And then when you flip to the next page, you have a whole fact sheet on the Norns, the 3 beings of fate. And that's something this book does really well, is that it'll introduce you to a myth and a story and then give you a character sheet where you understand. And then those things get repeated onwards and onwards. And so you're never lost while you're reading this book. So, for example, there's the bit about Sif's hair, and then you get to know about Sif. And later on, the dwarves' treasure of Sif's hair also comes up again. And had that not been there, I would have been very lost, but that doesn't happen. So, yeah.
Yes, I really agree. And I found, the figures and learning about like the 3 fates, absolutely fascinating. And I there was a lot I didn't know about Norse myths and all the different kinds of gods and goddesses. I was fascinated to discover there was a goddess of skiing, the skiing goddess. Okay. So question 4. Yes, as we're already finding, both books are just full of information, with Norse myths, with the series of their creation myths, bookended with the factual information about the Norse people and their lives, while People of the Indus is packed full of factual discovery about the growth of this extraordinary ancient civilization. And I wondered if you came away with an understanding of the people living then and with a sense of their daily lives. So I'll come back to you first, Laura.
I did, because of the way it was presented and there's so many illustrations, I found myself going, imagining what it must have been like living there. And as I was reading, so I was, as I said before, you had the tradespeople and the scribes and the craftsmen. They're all sort of living in prosperity, even in the same neighborhoods, which I was surprised about that too. And everybody had their own livelihood. So I imagined their daily life to be peaceful, slow paced, but they worked hard. I got the idea that they really did work hard. And then there was the question of, because always with ancient civilizations, we want to know, well, what about their religion, and because you're looking for some gods and goddesses, because a lot of other ones had, the pharaoh, and they had all these gods and goddesses and stuff. So there is information on page 57 in the book, and it's talking about plant and animal worlds were sacred, so that they probably had religious ceremonies under the pipal and the banyan trees, which sounded just so lovely to me. Just, oh, so lovely. And then written close by, there's on page 52, it says some scholars thought of the people of the Indus were dull since they didn't have monumental sculptures. Dull, I was like, wow. So then there's evidence of they had game boards, toys. There was a dye there. There were masks for celebrations and performances. There were elaborate hairstyles for men and women, and they had processions for special dates and festivals. So I was like, these people were not boring at all or dull in any way. They had a life that worked for them, and it looks like it would have been maybe even better than having a king, because everybody could prosper. I was still a little curious, and I guess they just don't know exactly, but what role the tiny sculptures played in religion, because I'm just fascinated with tiny ceramic sculptures. So I was looking at them going, yeah, maybe they used them in rituals. They may have, of course, had other things, as they mentioned in the text, that didn't survive, like textiles. That we just don't know about certain things that are gone. But from what they left, I think that they were super interesting people, and I think they had a good life.
Yes. Yeah. I also, and I was really struck when I read about water systems, the sophisticated engineering that made sure that everybody had clean water. And there's something really lovely about that. And I had a sense of them working hard, yet with such a balance of kind of culture based on cooperation and sort of harmony. Yeah, I was very interested by the figurines that show yoga.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Back,
yeah.
That kind of wisdom.
Or the tiny little tea sets, that the children play with. They're really, really tiny, and they're just like, it's like.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so Ian, the same question for you about the Norse myths. Did you feel from this particular illustrated book that you came away with an understanding of the people living then and the sense of their daily lives?
Yes, my understanding of the Vikings quite deepened by reading this book because I knew about the Vikings as warriors and their conquests. And towards the end of the book, this section on after the myths, the people who were making the myths, I for the first time learned about what farming was like for the Vikings and who the craft workers were. And these are things that till now I did not know. I only knew about the acts of strength and the bravery. And so that was really interesting to know about how that civilization was sustained and who helped out, because it mentions many Norse warriors were also farmers and they tilled the land from dusk till dawn, and then women and children also helped out, and the craft workers put together the armor and the fabrics of the Vikings, which was till now invisibilized for me, at least in what I knew. And also just the way construction was done about the forts and where they lived and how they were fortified based on Asgard, which was a very interesting concept to me. And the most interesting thing, however, was the way the stories are carried on. Finding out the storytelling traditions of the Vikings was really interesting to me. And it mentions that they believe that they got the gift of storytelling from Odin, and that they quite enjoyed sitting around a fire, and the poets who were called skalds, if I'm not mispronouncing it, used to recite poetry for the kings. And there were picture carvings as well. So it's very interesting also to trace a lineage of how these stories have carried on, how these myths have carried on. The one question that I was left with, though, is that we have all of these myths and all of this information about the gods that informed their lives. But as with many polytheistic religions, there is most people have different sects or different gods that they show allegiance to differently. It's not just a singular structure of this person I believe in, this person I don't believe in. So what I'm interested in is what that structure was like for the Vikings. Where was it? Did some people worship different gods to different capacities, or was the structure very rigid in that sense?
Yes.
That is not something I was able to get a sense of.
Yes, no, that would be really interesting to research that. I could just sort of imagine them, calling on the war gods as they sail off to conquer other lands, because they were huge fighters. And I was struck by that contrast between actually the farming and the agricultural and their warlike nature. And I was really interested in that. And I also had a sense from that actually their daily lives could be very hard, that famine was never far away, and their kind of preoccupation with death, thinking of the warriors in battle as well, and the underworld and all the myths about that. So I did have a sense of a harshness to their daily existence too. So both books show the growth of highly contrasting civilizations. What did you understand about each civilization's cultural understanding of social and/or divine hierarchy? I mean, I think we've started to speak about that anyway, Ian, so I don't know if you had any more to add.
Yes. So the divine hierarchy is something that I was thinking about who believes in what, but there is within the myths a clear hierarchy of what the god's positioning is and who the people followed. But it also is very interesting how that informs their daily lives. Like I brought up that the fort that the kings lived in was modeled after Asgard. So there is a sense of the divine coming in, being brought into the real world. And the social hierarchy was also interesting because when I did mention farmers, what I forgot was that it doesn't say that there was a section of people who were farming. It says that many warriors were also farmers. So that there's no like hierarchy. What I gathered was there was no hierarchy there where the warriors were also farmers and they were helping nourish the people, but they were also going out to fight. So it was very in flux.
Yeah, I was really, I just hold that up actually, struck by can you see, that the tree, and that felt there's definitely the different levels of sort of planes with the humans in the middle and then the gods at the top, and all sorts of other figures inhabiting. Thank you. Yes, Laura, how did you find your understanding about each civilization's cultural understanding of hierarchy, either social or divine, from people of the Indus?
Yeah, the people of the Indus didn't seem to have that. That what you just showed, at least they haven't found anything like that that would indicate that there's a god at the top and that they were less than. As I had mentioned before, the different occupations lived in the same area, same neighborhood, just maybe some had a bigger apartment or bigger house, whatever. So there wasn't this division by social class, class or occupation either. And then the other thing that I really liked was that, of course, I didn't know about them, but it really was amazing that they had this maritime trade. So they also built ships. So they're building these really tiny little sculptures, but they're also building ships, and they traded with Mesopotamia. And I thought, wow, Mesopotamia, I just thought, oh, they were like self-contained over there and they're making their own stuff, but they bought jewelry and beads and fine crafts from the people of the Indus. And so I thought that was, they must have had a sense that their art was, what did I write? That their work mattered in the larger world, and not just economically to them, but it had artistic value. If there was such a, a thing, I don't know, because sometimes people say, well, no, in ancient Egypt, art wasn't a word. It was just everything was religion. So maybe not art, but their craftsmanship was valued in the larger world and not just in their own world. So for me, I think they probably should, they were probably proud of their work because, and it was just so, and also there was no warfare. There was no large warfare. They weren't going out. They didn't feel the need to go out and conquer other people. or go get some slaves, or, so it just felt this more egalitarian functioning of society instead of a hierarchy, which pretty amazing. Really, I was
Yes,
impressed.
yes, me too, and really struck when the narrator starts to question. They must have known about war and warlike behaviour from the other
Mm.
city, but what they just didn't seem. She said something like they didn't seem to have the need.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing, amazing.
It is a very hopeful picture, isn't it, of what a culture could be.
Could be. Yeah, if we could take a lesson, we could take a lesson from
Yeah.
them, I think, today.
Thank you. I'll stay with you for the next question then, Laura. What do you think of the approaches that the authors took to the material? Were there any great techniques for illuminating the material, or something about the voice to draw the reader in that stood out to you?
So for me, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So of course I had already mentioned that you have the little author, pictured on it several times, sometimes in each spread, and he's just really very present. So I thought that was what an interesting idea. I had never seen a book like that before. You can have a graphic book, but usually you feel like you're on your own reading it. So that technique was really good, that approach. And then it made, so the way that it was, they often pictured the city or a little courtyard, or zoomed out, zoomed in, and it made you feel like you were there, like these people had come to life again, because there were drawings of the people and they were going about their, business. And it was like, oh, this is amazing. I can almost hear them and feel how it must be to be there. So I thought that was really nice. The other thing was the visual layout are engaging, and no two spreads are alike. I had mentioned that. They're just all different. So each time you turn the page, it's set up a little bit differently, so it keeps your interest, visual interest, and zoomed out. And then we have dense imagery. And my favorite chapter, I have to say, was Journey of a Bead. There's so much going on. I saw the title, I was like, oh, I've got to read this chapter, because it's like, I love beads, and it was just beautiful. So it's lots of things going on. We learn about the bead making, and the shipbuilding, and the maritime trade. And then in chapter 4, right after that, writing your way to civilization, that it was a little bit harder. It was a little bit denser. And when they start talking about, we don't know what language they spoke, and we haven't deciphered their script yet. And I was like, oh no, there's so many things they don't know when it comes to language, but maybe they will. And I thought that was kind of hopeful too, because children can say, well, it's not all set in stone. Perhaps I can read more books or keep up with this and read another book later if they make more discoveries. And perhaps maybe some children will decide to be archaeologists or linguists because of reading this book, because this is the kind of thing that could spark someone's interest in going further with this as an adult. So,
Yes, definitely. I was quite struck by when you have the narrator with you, with the companion taking you through with all the different images and the words, and then occasionally there would be simply pictorial pages, which were kind of quite, I found that suddenly, restful, like as though it uses a different part of your brain when you're just looking at images without words. So I was really struck by that. I thought that was a great technique for kind of keeping interest, and really it got me to really pay attention to those pictures without words, to what was happening, as I felt like a new way of reading.
yeah, yeah, yes, definitely, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Ian, were there, what did you think of the approaches that the authors took to the material in Norse myths, and any great techniques for illuminating material, or something about the voice that drew you in?
I think the structure is absolutely fantastic for this book, because it starts with an introduction about the myths, and then you get the myths, then you find out about the gods, and then you find out about the creatures, and then you go to the stories about the Vikings who believed in these myths. And it's very beautifully structured in the sense that you get all of the information bit by bit, and you're not very overwhelmed or lost at any point with all of this information that you're getting. And so if like the Vikings were brought in here and there in the middle, I think I would have lost track a little bit. But I got a great sense of their beliefs and their belief systems through the earlier sections. And then when we went to the end, and the section on the Vikings is quite small and doesn't go quite in depth. It just says they believed in many gods when it talks about religious beliefs. I already know what gods they believed in and what these stories were that informed their daily lives. And so I really appreciated that. I really appreciated the structure of the book and that it sticks very directly to that, because this is not a book like The People of the Indus where there is a narrator who's guiding you through. There is a sort of omnipresent, like third person voice who's telling you these myths and then very factually telling you about the gods and the creatures. And so it's very important there to sort of pace the reader. And especially because this is a kid's book, it doesn't divulge too much so that they don't get overwhelmed, which for the myths is fine because you have stories and there's a lot of action happening. So you stay engaged. But that section about the Vikings towards the end, it mentions a lot of things, but it doesn't go fully into depth about that. So like Laura said, it'll inspire children to go out and look for these things. Why are these happening? What, for example, like I really want to now know what the poets were, what works survived, what the tradition was, who taught the poets this art of poetry. Was it something that was passed on generation to generation? And so it leaves that gap for children to later discover more, which I found really beautiful.
Yes. Something else that actually struck me was how those tales are often quite full of brutality, but they're also very funny, and there's the kind of lightness of touch about it all that makes it just really enjoyable to read, despite somebody's being thrown into the sea by Thor, whatever that is. Which I thought was really skillful, actually, that lightness of touch. And I mean, there's some of the stories I just was really laughing as I read. Were there, I'll stay with you, Ian, any particular spreads or pages that particularly appeal to you that you could hold up for us to see, and just share anything that the pages might have evoked for you?
Yes. Like I said in the beginning, the whole book is so incredibly beautiful that you just want to keep looking at it. But what I do appreciate about a lot of these spreads, especially the ones about the myths relating to the gods, is that if there is a story about one person or one thing, the framing is of all of the characters involved. So, for example, this I found really beautiful, which is the forging of Thor's hammer. And so it's not just about the hammer, it's not just about Thor. You have all the characters involved in the creation of the hammer, and it's looping around. So you get a visual sense of what the story is because of how it's progressing and how it changes hands, all of the materials. But it also gives you a very good sense of how the hammer is not just Thor's and it's not just for Thor. It involves all of these other characters who came together to sort of make this possible and make this myth possible. And usually when we look at a myth, we look at a singular character. And what this book does wonderfully, and this happens multiple times over, is that if there is a story about one thing happening, everybody is present and all the characters are present. So you get a very good sense of how it was a community and how everybody was involved in everything.
Yes. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Yeah, they're so beautiful, aren't they? The illustrations. It's sort of hard to choose a page. I love the circularity. I love this. That's the sun and the moon, and they're you can see them just circulating the actual page, and the idea of the wolves chasing the sun and the moon is a sort of, that's why they rise and fall. And as so often it mentions when by the they'll be swallowed at the end of the world. We'll
Yeah.
finally catch up.
And could I say one more thing, one spread that
Oh.
really did stay with me? And this is just the image. This is from Baldur's Funeral. And it's a very simple art style with 2D figures facing the side, but there's such emotion in the eyes that you get such a deep sense of what the story is about and what the characters are feeling, and you feel it too. And it sort of primes you when you're going to the story about the funeral, and you're already feeling the sort of grief for Baldur at his funeral. And that's something the book does wonderfully with even such a simple art style. It changes emotions really clearly for the characters.
Yes. Oh yes, thank you. Yeah, that's really touching. A real contrast, and how it includes so many different feelings and relationships and happenings. Okay, I'll come to you, Laura. Any particular spreads or pages that particularly appeal to you, and if possible, share anything that these pages evoked.
There's so many. There's so many. And even though it's not colorful, it doesn't have, it's black and white. But so the section I liked the best was why they didn't build pyramids. And it's sort of like, bigger is not always better. And, they don't have to be like the Egyptians, so it gives the 3 reasons. So this is page, let me see, 43, the 3 reasons why they didn't build. So decentralized power. And I loved this, like, they all lived here, and over here in Mesopotamia, we got the rich people here, and everybody else is outside the walled city. So they were just fending for themselves, I guess. I don't know what they were doing, but they were outside the protection. And then the next page, no large-scale warfare. So yeah, I mean, these people were taking slaves, killing people, cutting off hands and stuff. Meanwhile, the Indus people, they just had some knives for the guards at the gates, to guard everybody. So that's all they needed, And then my favorite part, of course, miniaturized art. This is my favorite.
Oh, lovely.
They don't need big statues and huge, I don't know, queens or whatever. These are just so wonderful. And you can see how small they are because we have the narrator. And then I just wanted to reach in and pick them up, just hold them in my hand. You could hold them in your hand. The whole thing is you can hold their art in your hand. They could hold it in your hand. And so there's something sacred about that. It's not just having a huge statue to pray to. It's having something sacred that everyone has and can have. So perhaps they had small altars in their homes or maybe, under the trees. And then the other one was, of course, this one where they compared the pyramids, cigarettes, and then, of course, they were engineers too. Look at these walls they built, and everyone lived inside the walls, not outside the walls. It was sort of inclusive walls instead of this exclusive pyramid. No one could go there. I mean, it was just the priests and the pharaoh when he died. So there's something sort of morbid about that too. I mean, I know everyone likes the pyramids because they look big, but if you were a regular person, you couldn't go in there. So I really like the fact that you could go in to the walls. And then, so finally, my final thing was the seals.
Oh, yeah.
They have survived, and they are made in steatite. I had to look on what that is. It's metamorphic rock, and the carvings is just very, very fine. So beautiful. And they had their animals that were sacred on the seals, and they have some inscriptions. And it's just that, things were not made for a king, they were made for the people. So I think that that's why I love those pages, that it sort of summed up these people and their more humanitarian and egalitarian society.
Yes, oh, thank you. That's a lovely summary. Yes, and how beautiful it would be to have those small figurines.
Yeah. So
in your hands.
Yeah.
Be included inside the walls rather than placed with some great monolith that's
exactly
for the chosen one. Yeah, a page I really loved just to share was the one about the kind of towards the writing, partly because I absolutely love the simplicity of this first page, just the black and white and that bird, and that's one thing that really always kept my attention when there's so much information to take in, and suddenly you have this really simple but very bold page. And I love the way the narrator, he talks about how he used to think writing must have been invented by a storyteller, or perhaps a prophet or a king. It actually says it was an accountant.
Yeah. That was surprising.
Keep track of the accounts, and decided to write them down. And then he goes on to say, over time, writing got put to new uses, and ultimately it was writing that enabled civilization and not the other way around, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Something to think on. Before I go on to the last question, is there anything else that anyone wants to say? And I'd love Ian to ask, because you may have known about the Indus civilization, whereas Laura and I was completely new. And I don't know if there's anything more you would wanted to add or say about people of the Indus. Sorry.
Yeah, it was very interesting to read the book because, like I said, I studied it in school and it was very text-based, and you had to memorize it for an exam, so it wasn't very engaging. And so here, because you have all of these, you see everything, and then you have the narrator guiding you through, it makes it a lot more interesting, and a lot of the illustrations are of the narrator. And like both of you kept bringing up, that there were so many pages with no dialogue or no text, which really added to it. And so my favorite spread from this is because this book in some ways serves as an encyclopedia, where you get so much knowledge about construction and about statues and about writing, but it also is trying to tell a story. So there's this one series of panels where it's just, I think, a mother and a child playing, and it goes on from here, and without any words and without any direct information here, you get a story. It keeps you hooked to what's going on, and it also makes you look a lot closer at what's going on in the illustrations, and it really informs the reading practice for the book as well. So I think that spread especially made it very fascinating. And then there's one more spread somewhere around here where which is also why I love this book, is because there's a lot of creative visualization. And so you have the statues and the pottery drawn as they are, and the people drawn as they are, but you get also spreads like this about like ideological battles, and you present a different ideology as a boxing match, which makes it very clear for a younger reader to understand what exactly this rift is and who is on what side and who's on what side. And so it's not just giving you the simple facts of it, it's also telling you how it's led on from there, which was very interesting, which is not something that we were taught directly in school. So yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. I think they're a fantastic pairing to discuss books because they are such a contrast in so many different ways, aren't they? One sort of bursting with colour and war, and one black and white and bursting with information and knowledge. So yeah, I hope you two also found that. Okay, well, are there any other illustrated and or non-fiction books from your country concerning ancient stories, myths or fairy tales that you want to recommend?
Can I go? Laura, please go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have this one, which is rather old, and it's The Girl Who Helped Thunder and Other Native American Folktales. So it's illustrated as well. So to show you one illustration maybe, and yeah, it's illustrated throughout, and it's very nicely illustrated as if it's painted on wood, so it really looks nice. And it's a rather old book from 2007, but the fact is it's written by actual own voices, so it's Native Americans who are writing these, and they're storytellers anyway, so they collected them in a book for children so they can read them with their parents. So I read this to my children. And I just think these kinds of books, I know it's not UK or India, but that's where I'm from, the United States. So that's, these are
It's
the
your
people.
country, so that's absolutely
Yeah, that's my country. So even though I'm not Native American, we do enjoy reading these stories because these were the people who were there before us.
Yeah.
And I think, I have to recognize that. I mean, yeah, so I'm a mixed race. My father was African American and my mother was white. So the Native Americans were there before any of us, were there. And sometimes people forget that and don't acknowledge their importance. But, they had a lot of knowledge about the land and about the animals and about the plants and things like that. Sometimes gets washed aside because, Europeans came, So
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
wanted to teach my kids that these are the first people who were there and they're valuable. Their stories are valuable.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's there's a kind of link there, perhaps, with people of the Indus, with knowledge and wisdom
Yeah, yes.
came out of living within the land that
Yeah.
has painful, so much painful history.
Yeah, yes.
So yes, Iron.
Yes. So,
Illustrated
yeah.
books from India.
Yes. So there's this publisher called the Children's Book Trust, and what they do is they do folk tales from every state, which are illustrated, and which are very interesting to read because a lot of like Indian history or Indian stories get leveled into like Aesop's fables or the Panchatantra, and you're taught that there is like one way to be and one way to look at things and one moralistic message that you can give to children. Where when I read these books, I got the sense that every state and every village in that state had a different understanding of morality and of religion and of culture. And what it does is really multiplies what it means to be Indian and what multiplicity exists within the country. And so, you have these stories from Uttarakhand and from Madhya Pradesh and from Assam. And everywhere there's different culture informed by different tradition and different connections to nature and different connections to the outside world. And like I said, what it does is you get such a broad sense of what India is because there's so many attempts to try to make it one thing because all of us are made to read Aesop's fables and you get the messages that the saints in that book or the sons in that book give to like the stupid princes. You're like, oh, we should all live by these, which when in reality they don't apply to everyone. And so you should be able to find what your own history is, where you come from. Like when I read the stories from Uttarakhand, that really changed my perception because that's the state I'm from. And I didn't know these stories about people who I'm related to or this connection to my own culture for that matter. And so yeah, those books I would really recommend because you get such a broad idea of India through them. They're all really beautiful and they're all really short and interesting, and they're written very similar to the style of the Norse myths. So Suzanne, I think you'd really enjoy them because even if a story is dark, it's quite hilarious sometimes because they're written with a lightness of touch because they're intended for children.
Yes. Oh yes. Well, it'd be lovely. Please send that link for that. I'd love to read those. Is there anything else that we want to discuss before coming to a close? We have still got a bit of time, but that's okay. I feel like we've had a really rich, full discussion. Thank you both so much for all your insights and your attention to these books and how much you've seen and drawn out of them. It's been really lovely.
Thank you so much. That was such a fascinating dialogue. I think, Lexi, you would probably agree. The thing about nonfiction is that it is actually a peek into someone's culture as it was lived. And yes, there is a lot of imagination in the ways people live their life or choose to live their life in a particular period. But this was, it is also really how they lived. And that imagination is very real. It really translates into how they're living. So I am, so it's been so enlightening to see that sort of understanding of two very different cultures. I like Iron. I'd read Iron. I had read the Indus about the Indus Valley civilization back in school because it's very much part of our history textbooks. But to get this view and to get a view from, and it is actually very fascinating. And when I didn't have to study it for an exam, it did seem even more fascinating. And now to sort of hear from you and Laura, Suzanne, about what you thought of it. Um, as someone coming from, a part of the world where that culture comes from, it is very, very moving to hear, that insight. And of course, I'm very sure, I think my reactions to the Norse myths were very similar to what Ayan has spoken about. Very colorful, and also I was also seeing the ways in which they're very similar to the stories I had heard about different myths. Some of the gods and the god of thunder, and they do resonate across cultures. So that was quite interesting for me. But thank you so much. It has been so lovely, and I'm sure everyone who listens into the dialogue, including the authors who we have next month with us, would, really enjoy listening into the wonderful insights that have been brought in by all of you. So thank you very, very much, Suzanne, Ayan, and Laura, and of course to the ever wonderful Lexi for doing this with me. It's really precious, this whole project.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I think we could end the discussion, and it's been lovely. It's just been lovely.
It has.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.